Welcome back to the U.S. Navy History Podcast. I am Dale, and I am joined by Christoph. Hey, Christoph.
Hello, Dale. How are you?
Good.
Good.
So, when most people think of the U.S. Navy, they picture the sleek silhouette of a destroyer cutting through the waves, the thunder of aircraft launching from a carrier, or the silent glide of a submarine deep beneath the sea. But few people think about the spaces below decks. The hot, loud steel labyrinth where the ship's true lifeblood flows. Down there, in the heart of the vessel, you'll find the machinist mates, or MMs, the sailors responsible for keeping the Navy's ships alive. They're the ones who make sure the screws turn, the turbines spin, and the engines breathe. Without them, the mightiest warship is nothing more than a drifting hulk. Machinist mates are often described as the heartbeat of the Navy, and for good reason. They operate, maintain, and repair the systems that make every other function of the ship possible. Propulsion, steering, power generation, hydraulics, air conditioning, and water. If it moves, hums, or spins aboard a ship, a machinist mate probably has a wrench on it. Yet, for all their importance, these sailors work far from the spotlight. Their world isn't the bridge, the flight deck, or the radar room. It's the engine spaces, where the air is thick, with heat, and the roar of machinery never stops. It's a place of constant motion, pistons thumping, turbines whining, gauges trembling. Temperatures can soar past 120, 130 degrees, and the noise can drown out conversation. It's hard, physical, relentless work, but for those who serve there, it's also a badge of pride. As one machinist mate once put it, quote, "The ship runs because we make her run. That's all the glory we need." The machinist mate's rate has deep roots, tracking back to the age of steam in the 19th century, when the Navy began trading sails for boilers. Someone had to master the new technology. These early engineers were the pioneers who kept the first steamships moving, often learning through trial, error, and burns from superheated pipes. By the late 1800s, the Navy recognized these men formally with the creation of the machinist mate rate, a title that has endured through wars, revolutions in technology, and the evolution from steam to nuclear power. From the clanging boiler rooms of the Great White Fleet to the humming nuclear plants of today's submarines, the machinist mate has remained a constant presence, a blend of mechanic, engineer, and problem solver. What makes the machinist mates unique isn't just what they do, it's how they do it. They embody a certain kind of sailor, one who thrives on challenge, sweat, and the satisfaction of solving problems with their own hands. They are the improvisers and innovators. When a vital pump breaks at sea or a bearing seizes in the middle of a mission, there is no waiting for a repair crew. The machinist mate is the repair crew. They find a way. They always find a way. So, in this episode, we're going below decks to trace the story of the machinist mate from its earliest days to the nuclear age. We'll explore how these sailors powered America's warships through 2 world wars, adapted to the demands of the Cold War, and continue to keep the fleet moving today. Because while admirals may command the Navy and captains may steer it, the machinist mates are the ones who make it go.
I'm very excited to dig in this. This is one of those things that you don't see a lot in the media or like movies and whatnot. I don't hear a lot about the machinist mate. So given what you just described as far as the breadth of their responsibilities, from the nuclear engines to a radio or air conditioner. I mean, those are specialties in and of themselves, and they have to handle multiple of those. So, very excited to find out how they pull that off. So, let's jump in.
To understand the machinist mate, we have to go back to a time when the U.S. Navy was still a relatively small force. Its ships powered not by gas turbines or nuclear reactors, but by the wind. The early 1800s were the age of wood, canvas, and muscle, when frigates like the USS Constitution ruled the waves with broadside cannons and towering masts. But beneath the surface of that romantic image, a revolution was already beginning. A revolution of steam, steel, and engineering that would change the Navy forever. The story begins in the mid-19th century, when the Navy started experimenting with steam propulsion. Early vessels like the USS Mississippi and the USS Princeton were among the first American warships to harness the power of boilers and pistons instead of sails and rigging. These new engines were powerful, but temperamental. They required constant
That's a good one.
They required constant attention. Water levels had to be monitored, pressure gauges checked, and boilers fed a steady diet of coal. Too much pressure and a boiler could explode. Too little and the ship would lose power. Operating these engines was not glamorous work. The sailors who did it were called firemen or engineers, and they spent their days shoveling coal into red-hot furnaces, wiping soot from their faces and listening for the hiss and groan of pipes that signaled trouble. Still, these men, the Navy's first true machinists, mechanics of the sea, taming the fiery heart of the ship. As steam technology advanced, the need for skilled operators grew. By the 1880s, naval vessels had become complex machines, filled with pumps, condensers, and miles of piping. The Navy recognized that it needed trained specialists who could not only operate these systems, but also repair them under pressure. So in 1880, the Navy officially created the Machinist Mate rate. The title reflected both the skill and the partnership at the core of the job. Machinist mates were the right hand of the ship's engineers, responsible for maintaining the propulsion systems that kept the fleet mobile. Their insignia, a three-bladed propeller, became a symbol of their role, the force that turns the ship, unseen but essential. The turn of the century marked a massive leap in naval technology. Ships like the USS Maine and the USS Oregon represented a new kind of fleet. Armored, steel-hulled, and powered entirely by steam. By the time the Great White Fleet sailed around the world in 1907, the Navy had transformed into a modern industrial force. Every ship carried engineering departments manned by machinist mates who knew how to keep the boilers burning and the engines turning, even in the most remote corners of the world. They were no longer just stokers and tinkerers. They were engineers, mechanics, and troubleshooters rolled into one. And their world was a brutal one. The heat in the engine rooms could reach 120 degrees or higher. And this is Fahrenheit, not Celsius. That's 49 degrees Celsius. Noise levels were deafening. The air was thick with oil, steam, and sweat. But for many sailors, the challenge was part of the appeal. They took pride in mastering machines that few others understood. Imagine standing in the engine room of a battleship in 1905. Around you, massive pistons pumped up and down. The decks tremble with vibration. The scent of hot oil fills the air. And everywhere you look, there are valves, dials, and spinning shafts that must be monitored constantly. Machinist mates worked in shifts, often 12 hours or more, covered in grime, stripped to their undershirts, sweating beside roaring boilers. Communication was done with hand signals or through voice tubes leading up to the bridge. It was dirty, exhausting, and dangerous, but it was also where the ship lived. The engine room was the pulse of the vessel, and its crew took fierce pride in keeping it beating smoothly. In 1898, the Navy went to war with Spain, and for the first time, its ships would be powered entirely by steam.
Hmm.
The performance of the engineering crews during the war, especially during the Battle of Manila Bay, proved the value of the machinist mate beyond any doubt. While guns won the headlines, it was the men below deck who made victory possible. When Commodore Dewey gave his famous order, "You may fire when ready, Gridley," it was the machinist mates deep in the belly of the USS Olympia who kept the ship moving and the engines humming through the entire battle. By the early 1900s, the machinist mate had become one of the Navy's most technologically demanding and respected ratings. The work required both brain power and brawn. A knowledge of mechanics, metallurgy, and hydraulics, paired with the physical endurance to labor in stifling heat. These early MMs were the bridge between two worlds, the age of steam and the dawn of electricity and internal combustion. Their skills would soon be tested again on a scale the world had never seen. Because as the 20th century opened, a new kind of war loomed. One that would turn the oceans into global battlefields. And when it came, the machinist mates would be there, deep below decks, keeping the fleet in motion.
That is really an excellent descriptor of that responsibility. I was just picturing myself in that role. Equal parts brains and bronze, like you said, but also dealing with just massive heat while you're working in stressful situations. Like you said, if something needs repaired, it needs repaired now because you are working to a goal or trying to accomplish a mission, and there's no room for waiting. So if you know any machinist mates in your life, you might want to give them at least a solid handshake, if not a beverage of their choice.
Well,
but that's pretty cool.
You owe me a beverage of my choice.
I'll settle for handshake. That's good.
But you just said you'd give me a
yeah,
beverage of
at
my
least.
choice.
No, I'll give you a handshake. But I said, or maybe okay. Well, hold on. What is the beverage of your choice?
Oh, twisted tea.
I can handle that.
You know I was a machinist mate, right?
I do.
That's why we're covering
it's no
this
surprise.
first.
It's no surprise that we're going through this rating. But that's what's excellent about that, though, is you are certainly the most familiar with this rate because you've lived it. And so the responsibilities and the day-to-day, what is it like, you know. And so you're able to convey that to not just to me, but to the audience. So it's kind of cool to get an insight into this role. You assume things work. Like you assume, yeah, the ship's going to go and we're going to aim the guns that way and everything's going to be all right. And that is not the case at all. There's a team of folks like you that make that happen. And so that's cool.
By the time the world descended into the war in 1914, the U.S. Navy had grown from a modest coastal defense force into the modern fleet with steel hulls, turbines, and battleships that rivaled those of Europe's great powers. And deep inside those ships, in the blistering heat and rhythmic roar of the engine rooms, the machinist mates were ready. When the United States entered the World War I in 1917, these sailors became the lifeblood of the Navy's global effort. Their job was no longer just about turning engines. It was about ensuring victory at sea. World War I was the first conflict truly fought with machines.
Mm-hmm.
Submarines prowled the Atlantic, destroyers raced to protect convoys, and dreadnought battleships stood as floating fortresses of steel. And in every one of them, the machinist mates were the unseen heroes below the waterline. They operated triple expansion steam engines, massive mechanisms that turned steam into power through a precise balance of heat and pressure. It was a delicate dance. Too little water in the boiler, and the tubes would overheat. Too much, and the pressure could drop at a critical moment. Machinist mates had to monitor dozens of gauges and valves, feeling vibrations through their boots, listening for the faintest change in pitch that might mean trouble. They could read a machine the way a navigator reads the sea. And they did it under constant strain, knowing that a single mechanical failure could mean death for everyone on board. It's hard to describe the engine spaces of a World War I ship to someone who's never been there. Imagine a cavern of steel filled with churning shafts, hissing steam, and the thunder of pistons the size of tree trunks. The air was hot, thick with oil and smoke. Men stripped to their waists, sweat running down their arms as they turned valves and wiped grime from brass fittings. Communication was nearly impossible over the roar. Orders from above came through brass voice tubes, shouted through the clamor. When the ship was at battle stations, the tension was electric. Every clang of metal, every shift in the deck could mean action or disaster. Yet through it all, the machinist mates kept the rhythm steady, the ship moving, and the engines alive. World War I also marked a turning point in naval propulsion. Many newer ships like the USS Texas and the USS Nevada used steam turbines instead of the older piston engines. These turbines were more powerful and efficient, but also a heck of a lot more complex. Machinist mates had to master the art of turbine maintenance, understanding how to balance rotating shafts spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute, and how to diagnose the subtle vibrations that could signal bearing damage or misalignment. The Navy depended on their expertise to keep its new technological marvels at sea, and they delivered. After the war, the Navy kept evolving. The 1920s and 30s saw the birth of new engineering schools and training centers dedicated to producing highly skilled machinist mates were now learning about diesel engines, electrical systems, and auxiliary machinery, air compressors, hydraulic pumps, and refrigeration units. The fleet was diversifying, and so was the role of the MM. Still, the fundamentals never changed. Keep the ship moving no matter what. Then came December 7th, 1941. When Japanese planes roared over Pearl Harbor, they found hundreds of machinist mates already at their posts, working below decks in engine rooms, manning turbines and tending to boilers. When bombs hit the battleships, many of those men never had a chance to escape. The attack was devastating, but it also galvanized the Navy. Within months, the United States was building ships faster than the enemy could sink them. Destroyers, carriers, submarines, landing ships, each one needed machinist mates. Thousands of young men joined the rate, trained in the art of keeping engines alive under fire. For the machinist mates who served aboard submarines, the dangers were even more intense. In a submarine, every noise, every vibration mattered. An engine misfire could reveal your position to enemy sonar. A malfunctioning cooling pump could overheat the diesel engines, or worse, release fumes that could choke the crew. Submarine MMs became masters of improvisation. If something broke while submerged, they had to fix it fast, often in cramped spaces barely big enough to crouch. They could feel the heartbeat of the engines through the deck plates and know instinctively when something was off. On surface ships in the Pacific, the job wasn't much easier. Temperatures in the boiler rooms could hit 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Machinist mates rotated in short shifts to survive the heat, stepping out for air only when they could. Many described it as working inside a furnace that never stopped roaring. Yet, even in those conditions, their precision never wavered. If the engines stopped, the guns fell silent. If the turbines failed, the ship was a sitting duck. Their endurance kept the Navy war machine in motion. From the island-hopping campaigns of the Pacific to the convoy runs of the Atlantic. Wartime necessarily also sparked innovation. Machinist mates learned to fabricate parts on the fly, using lathes and mills aboard repair ships. They could refine a bearing, rebuild a pump, or patch a cracked steam pipe in the middle of the ocean. One veteran remembered repairing a damaged turbine bearing with melted down brass shell casings because no spare parts were available. The fix worked, awesome, and the ship made it home. Stories like that became legend in the rate. Resourcefulness wasn't just a skill, it was survival. When the war finally ended in 1945, the Navy's machinist mates had powered the fleet across every ocean, from the frozen North Atlantic to the blazing tropics of the Pacific. They had kept the destroyers that hunted U-boats, the carriers that launched airstrikes, and the submarines that prowled enemy waters, all running, day and night, in calm seas and storms alike. Their work rarely made the headlines, but without them, the Navy's victories would have been impossible. In the years that followed, as the Navy transitioned from steam to new forms of power, the machinist mates' rate stood ready to adapt again, because that's what they have always done. They were the steady hands behind the steel, the ones who made the impossible possible, and the men who through grit and grease kept the engines of war turning.
I gotta tell you, so I've only visited 2 World War II era warships. One is the USS Alabama. It's a battleship. The other is the USS Lexington, which is an aircraft carrier. And in both cases, when you walk around that ship, at first, like kind of the top deck areas, those are pretty spread out, broad. There's a lot of space for things. But then as you descend into the lower decks, I couldn't even make it all the way through the 3 decks down because it was so tight. When you're describing these very small spaces and what they had to, where they had to work, what they had to work with, and what they had to fix, it is so cramped. And everything is accessible to a degree because it has to be. But having to traverse that gigantic vessel and be ready to fix any number of things on there just sounds incredible. So I have a question for you as a result of this. How many, like the ships that you've served on, how many machinist mates would there be on a ship of whatever size?
Well, it just depends on the size of the ship. I can only speak to the one I served on, and we had hundreds.
Whoa.
There was there was the one, those of us that were down in the propulsion spaces, like me. And then there's also the auxiliary engineering departments. So we had machinist mates doing maintenance throughout the ship. Pretty much anything that needed maintenance, a machinist mate is going to have their hands in for the most part.
I see. I figured it'd be a big number, hundreds, for whatever reason. Yeah, that sounds right. Based on the ships that I've been on.
This was also a carrier, so much larger ship.
And a lot more to break, right?
Yes.
So
in a modern Navy, there's also other engineering rates as well, like GSM, gas turbine specialists, that would do the gas turbine engines and things of that nature. But there's also machinist mates doing other work in the auxiliary spaces and everything like that on every single ship.
That's incredible. I just keep thinking there was this guy I knew in college, and he had this saying. When I would ask him, "Are you serious?" He'd say, "Serious as a bent valve." And that is serious.
Yes.
Because I can imagine if you had to face something like that, that would be very difficult to deal with.
Yeah, because we got to isolate that system. We got to remove the bent valve, replace it with a new valve. Depending on the size of the valve, I remember one time having to replace a valve. This was a 2,500-pound valve.
Oh my gosh.
That we had to manually move from where it was stored about 10 decks distance and about half of the length of the ship.
Golly. How did you manage that?
Very slowly, very carefully, and with a lot of manpower.
Right. And this is at sea, I imagine,
Yes,
right?
this is at sea.
That's incredible. But that's a great illustration of what you guys are responsible for, or what that rating has to do. And that's just, yep, we got to do this. Let's figure out how to get it done.
When the guns of World War II fell silent, the U.S. Navy faced a new question. What comes next? The age of massive fleets and global sea battles was ending. But a new era, one defined by technology, deterrence, and the atom, was just beginning. For the machinist mates, this was not the end of their story. It was their next great transformation. The early 1950s, the Navy was at a crossroads. Steam propulsion powered by boilers had carried the fleet for nearly a century. But the demands of the Cold War called for ships that could travel further, faster, and longer without refueling. Enter nuclear power. In 1954, the launch of the USS Nautilus changed everything. She was the world's first nuclear-powered submarine, capable of traveling thousands of miles underwater without surfacing. And deep inside her reactor spaces were a new breed of sailors. Machinist mates trained to handle the unimaginable, the controlled power of the atom. The Navy realized quickly that nuclear propulsion would demand an entirely new level of technical expertise. To meet that challenge, it created a specialized training pipeline, and with it, a new designation within the rate. Machinist Mates Nuclear, or MMN. These sailors were no longer just mechanics or technicians. They were nuclear engineers in uniform. They learned reactor theory, thermodynamics, radiation control, and the delicate procedures of operating nuclear propulsion systems where even a small mistake could have catastrophic consequences. The training was, and still is, among the toughest in the U.S. military. Candidates go through months of academic study, followed by hands-on work at nuclear power training units known as prototype plants. The standards are unforgiving. Only those who demonstrate both mental precision and personal discipline make it through. Because when you're standing watch in a nuclear reactor compartment, there is no margin for error. To the machinist mates of the old steam fleet, the nuclear reactor room must have seemed like science fiction. Gone were the roaring furnaces and coal dust, the clang and heat of the boiler rooms. In their place, a silent, humming heart of technology. Instead of shovels, the tools were control rods, coolant loops, and radiation monitors. But the principles were the same. Power still had to be generated. Turbines still had to turn. And every valve, pump, and pipe had to be maintained with absolute care. Nuclear MMs carried forward the same spirit of responsibility that had defined the rates since the days of steam. The understanding that the ship, the crew, and sometimes even the mission itself depended on their vigilance. Throughout the Cold War, machinist mates, both conventional and nuclear, served aboard submarines, aircraft carriers, and surface ships that formed the backbone of America's global deterrent. In the 1960s, as the Navy built nuclear-powered aircraft carriers like the USS Enterprise and ballistic missile submarines known as boomers, MMs were at the core of it all. Literally. They became the trusted custodians of the Navy's most secretive technology. Aboard submarines armed with nuclear missiles, they ensured the reactors stayed silent and stable during long, unseen patrols beneath the ocean. They were the quiet professionals behind America's second strike capability, the promise that even if attacked, the United States could respond. It was pressure of a different kind than the engine rooms of old, but just as intense. Meanwhile, not every machinist mate worked in nuclear propulsion. The rate diversified into two major communities: MMN, nuclear machinist mates serving aboard nuclear powered ships, and MMA, auxiliary machinist mates focusing on systems like hydraulics, air conditioning, and refrigeration aboard conventional vessels. Both required deep mechanical knowledge and their ability to troubleshoot under pressure, whether maintaining a nuclear reactor or repairing a seawater pump. MMs continue to be the problem solvers of the fleet. In many ways, the nuclear age only reinforced what has always been true. The Navy depends on its engineers. Even as computers began to replace analog gauges and automation crept into ship systems, one thing never changed: the human element. Machinist mates still trained their senses to detect a misaligned pump by sound, or to feel the subtle vibration of a turbine through the deck. The technology evolved, but the intuition remained the same. The Navy could build the most advanced ships in the world, but it still needed sailors who understood how to keep them running. And no one understands that better than the MMs. By the end of the 20th century, the machinist mate rate had become one of the most technologically skilled professions in the military. MMs had powered every nuclear aircraft carrier and submarine in the fleet, carried the nation's deterrence on their shoulders, and written a legacy of discipline and excellence unmatched in naval engineering. They were the heirs of a long line that stretched from the coal-fired boilers of the Civil War to the reactors of the Cold War, a brotherhood and sisterhood of sailors bound by machinery's responsibility and pride. As the world changed above the surface, the machinist mates adapted below it. From the clang of pistons to the silent hum of uranium, they proved that technology may evolve, but craftsmanship and commitment never go out of style.
You know, as you kept describing the role and everything that a machinist mate is responsible for, I just kept coming back to the totality of everything you have to deal with. So I have another question for you, or a series of questions. How much time do you spend in training even after you're out of what I would assume was machinist mate school?
A school,
like
yeah.
some kind of technical training. Once you're deployed, I'm sure you still have to repeatedly go back, okay, we've got this new technology, or hey, we've got this new method, or this new tool, or whatever. How much time would you say in either in deployment time segments or a year would you spend on retraining?
Oh, you're always training.
What does that look like?
That looks like you're always training for doing casualty training. You're always training on your equipment, lighting them off, shutting them down. You're constantly
reinforcing
training.
Stuff you already know, or is it new stuff like, okay, I'm learning this new thing. I'm training on this. I don't know how to do these responsibilities for a fire team or repair a specific aspect of the engine.
It's both.
Well, constant training sounds about right for all that stuff.
I mean, we're going to get into the training and all of that here next, but just as quick and dirty, for instance, when I first got on board the George Washington, the very first thing I qualified for that everybody qualifies for is shaft alley patrol. And so you learn how to do that watch station. You learn about the equipment that you're monitoring.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, you start qualifying for more watch stations like the distilling unit watch, lower level watch, upper level watch, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And it just keeps on going. I see. Okay. That makes sense. Thanks. For those that are ignorant of that station in particular, but that helps. Thank you.
Yeah, no, training never stops.
It's a good philosophy of life.
So today's machinist mates live in a Navy that looks very different from that of their forebears. The ships are smarter, the systems are more complex, and the technology would be unrecognizable to the men who once shoveled coal into boilers beneath decks of steel and smoke. But the essence of the job, the heart of the rate, hasn't changed. It's still about keeping the ship alive. Whether stationed aboard an aircraft carrier, destroyer, amphibious ship, or submarine, a machinist mate is responsible for one thing above all else: making sure the mechanical systems that power, cool, and move the ship operate flawlessly. That includes propulsion systems, pumps, turbines, air compressors, hydraulics, steerings, distilling units, the ship's climate controlled freshwater systems. If it turns, hums, spins, or cools, an MM is behind it. While much of the old backbreaking labor of the steam era is gone, the mental demands have only grown. Today's MMs must master complex diagnostics, operate advanced computer control systems, and understand everything from fluid dynamics to electronic monitoring. There are mechanics, engineers, electricians, and troubleshooters rolled into one. After graduating from Navy boot camp, future machinist mates head to their first stop on the engineering pipeline, Machinist Mates A School at Naval Station Great Lakes in Illinois. Here, they learn the fundamentals: mechanical theory, tools and safety, propulsion basics, hydraulics and thermodynamics. It's a crash course in mechanical systems, packed into weeks of rigorous study and hands-on lab work. From there, the path diverges depending on specialization. Conventional MMs move on to their fleet assignments, operating and maintaining the mechanical heart of ships, powered by steam, gas turbines, or diesel engines. Nuclear MMs are one of the most intense training pipelines in the entire military, the Navy Nuclear Power Program. The nuclear pipeline is legendary for its rigor. It starts at Nuclear Power School in Charleston, South Carolina, where students tackle subjects like reactor physics, heat transfer, and radiation control. The workload is heavy, 6 days a week, often with 12-hour study days. Graduates then move to prototype training, working on operational training reactors at one of the Navy's nuclear power training units. It's here that theory becomes practice. Students stand watch on live reactor plants, learning to control power levels, manage coolant flows, and perform precision maintenance under the scrutiny of seasoned instructors. Those who make it through emerge as qualified nuclear propulsion specialists, ready to join the fleet aboard aircraft carriers and submarines, where the stakes are high and the standards absolute. Once assigned to a vessel, a machinist mate becomes part of the ship's engineering or reactor department, one of the most respected and tight-knit divisions aboard. On a surface ship, MMs might be found monitoring turbines, checking pumps and auxiliary machinery rooms, or responding to equipment casualties with a toolbox and a sense of urgency. On a submarine, they stand watch in spaces packed with machinery, responsible for the propulsion and life support systems that keep the boat running silently beneath the sea. Their days are long and structured. Watches rotate around the clock, often in 6-hour shifts. When they're not standing watch, they're performing preventative maintenance, logging system data, or tracking the endless task of keeping everything operational. It's demanding work, physically and mentally, but it's also deeply rewarding. Because when the captain orders all ahead full, the machinist mates are the ones who make it happen. To succeed as an MM, you need more than just technical knowledge. You need patience, focus, and the ability to stay calm under pressure. You need to be able to hear a subtle change in the pitch of a pump to know something's wrong before the sensors even notice. You need to trust your shipmates because the systems you maintain affect every soul on board. And above all, you need pride. The pride that comes from knowing your work keeps the mission alive. Ask any sailor who served at sea, and they'll tell you the ship is only as strong as its engineers. One of the most enduring traditions of the rate is the camaraderie it builds. The bond between MMs run deep, forged in heat, noise, and the long hours in the machinery spaces. They joke that you can always tell an MM by their hands, scarred, strong, and marked by work that never really ends. But they're also marked by something else: respect. Even a Navy filled with cutting edge technology and automation, there's still something timeless about the MM's craft. The feeling of steel under your palms, the smell of lubricating oil, and the satisfaction of machinery humming smoothly because of your touch. They're the quiet professionals of the fleet, the ones who don't seek attention, but without them, nothing moves. Every ship, every submarine, every mission depends on them, whether nuclear or conventional, whether deep under the sea or cutting through open waters. The machinist mates remain the keepers of the Navy's pulse.
The only thing I can relate to that is fixing stuff around the house or fixing cars. And one thing I've noticed, like I used to ask my dad, "Hey Dad, how come you only," because he would buy and sell cars just as a hobby because he loved cars, but they were always old cars. And I'm like, "Why are you only buying old cars?" He's like, "Because the new ones are too complicated to work on. They have computers and all these sensors, and like it's not worth it to him, because what he would do is buy them, fix them up, and sell them." And these are probably 60s to 70s era cars. And having to work on my own car, which is more modern, it's difficult. And they cramp a lot of crap into a little space. And so it drives me crazy at times, but even still, I don't have an electric car, which I can imagine is a whole nother echelon of having to work on that, and maybe something I wouldn't even bother with because of the degree of difficulty or knowledge it requires to maintain myself. And so with that as a baseline, when I translate that to what you're talking about, it's just like it's a whole nother level, just because of the things you've had to see and deal with and learn on the fly, and the time constraint you have with which to fix it. Like if my car doesn't work for a week, I can bum a ride here and there, but if the ship doesn't work for a week, you're screwed. And it really brings more tangible feeling to what you're saying, that not only do you work on more stuff, more complex stuff, but the time frame is teeny tiny, and that's just amazing. And the only way, like you said, to do that is to just train constantly and have that camaraderie amongst your fellow machinist mates. It's like, hey, I can't get this thing to work. Oh, that happened to me the other week. Let's get this done together, and boom, it's done. This brings a lot of, not pride for myself, but like transferred pride as to how my nation is handling itself in a military capacity. That's incredible. You guys are incredible, and I'm glad that things operate the way they do and have transformed over the years to be more and more effective.
The Navy runs on technology, on engines, turbines, and reactors, but what truly drives it forward is something deeper. It's pride, tradition, and a shared legacy that passes quietly from one generation of sailors to the next. Nowhere is that legacy stronger than in the machinist mate's rate. If you ask an MM what their rate means to them, you won't get a short answer. You'll hear stories about the nights spent in the engine spaces, drenched in sweat, keeping the systems alive while the rest of the ship sleep. You'll hear about the times a pump failed in the middle of a deployment, and how the team fixed it with what they had because failure wasn't an option. You'll hear about the laughter that echoes through the machinery rooms during long watches, when humor and teamwork kept exhaustion at bay. Machinist mates learn early that they're part of something bigger than themselves, a lineage of problem solvers and doers that stretches back to the age of steam. They wear that history like a badge of honor. Most visitors to a ship never see the engine rooms. They don't feel the heat or hear the hum of turbines spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute. They don't see the hands that keep it running. But every sailor aboard knows who makes the ship move. From the captain on the bridge, the newest seamen in the ranks, they all depend on the unseen expertise of the MMs below deck. It's a trust built over generations, and it's earned every single day. Being a machinist mate isn't just a job, it's a calling. It's the call to fix what's broken, to push through fatigue, to find order in chaos and beauty in precision. It's the pride of knowing that when the ship gets underway, when the engines roar to life and the wake spreads out behind her, you made that happen. That pride doesn't fade with time. It stays with the sailor long after they hang up their uniform. Ask any retired MM and they'll tell you, once an engineer, always an engineer. From the steam-driven warships of the 1800s to the nuclear-powered submarines of today, machinist mates have carried the Navy's lifeblood, generation after generation. Their tools may have changed, their ships may have evolved, but their mission has never wavered. Keep the ship alive. They are, and always have been, the heartbeat of the fleet. And that's the true measure of the machinist mate rate, not just in horsepower or efficiency, but in dedication, craftsmanship, and pride. Because in the end, when the ocean may test the Navy's strength, it's the machinist mates who prove its endurance.
I think this was a very cool deviation from what we typically do to really focus on what makes the Navy work, at least from a U.S. perspective. I'm sure it's similar in other nations, but to understand the dynamics of what happens on a ship and the roles that exist and that need to be honed in order for anything to happen. I mean, if you're thinking from a 30,000-foot level, it's like this fleet of ships needs to get to this location and secure it or attack this fleet or whatever. So many little things need to happen to make that big picture happen. And the machinist mate is behind most of it, really. I mean, I know there are several roles and everybody pitches in and does what they have to do. But like you said, from propulsion to maintenance to even HVAC, those things are tight quarters and can get really hot when you got 1,000 guys plus on a ship. It's amazing. And this is a really good insight as to the individual sailor and his or her contribution.
As we bring this episode to a close, let's take a moment to appreciate what we've explored today. Not just the story of a Navy rate, but the story of a legacy. The machinist mate isn't just another title in a long list of naval specialties. It's the story of endurance, of men and women who have kept the Navy moving, no matter the era, no matter the challenge. From the steamships of the 19th century to the nuclear-powered vessels of today, these sailors have been the steady hands behind the fleet's heartbeat. They've lived and worked in the hidden spaces below decks, where the air is thick with heat and the machinery never sleeps. They've turned wrenches, tightened bolts, and stood watch over reactors that power the most advanced ships on Earth. They've done their jobs not for glory or recognition, but because that's what keeps the Navy alive. If there's a theme that echoes through the story of the machinist mate, it's quiet professionalism. Every rate in the Navy has its place. The pilots, the deckhands, the gunners, the signalmen. But the machinist mate is different. They're the ones who make sure the mission can even begin. They're not the ones giving the orders or setting the course. They're the ones making sure the ship moves when those orders are given. Without them, the mightiest carrier or the stealthiest submarine is just a floating piece of metal.
Mm-hmm.
The technology will keep changing, from steam to diesel, from gas turbine to nuclear, and beyond. But the machinist mate will always be there, adapting, innovating, and carrying forward the same spirit that has powered the Navy for nearly 2 centuries. Their story is a story of progress and of pride. To every machinist mate, past and present, thank you. Thank you for the sweat, the sleepless watches, the endless hours keeping the ship alive, often unseen, but never unappreciated. Your work is the pulse of the fleet, the hum beneath every mission, and the heartbeat of the United States Navy. So we are going to end the episode like we like to end every episode, by honoring one of our fallen angels. And today we are going to honor Water Tender First Class Elmer C. Bigelow. He was born in Hebron, Illinois, or his hometown is Hebron, Illinois. Served with the U.S. Navy, USS Fletcher DD 445. He received the Medal of Honor and Purple Heart. His date of sacrifice was February 15th, 1945. Killed in action off Corregidor Island in the Philippines. He was 24. Navy Petty Officer First Class Elmer C. Bigelow likely knew that rushing into a smoke-filled compartment on a burning ship without any protection wouldn't end well for him. But he also knew the World War II ship crew would suffer devastating effects if he didn't. So he put his life on the line anyway to save them. For that, he posthumously earned the Medal of Honor. Bigelow was born on July 12, 1920, to Albert and Verna Bigelow. Sometime after his younger brother, Lester, was born, their parents divorced. Both boys lived with their mother and stepfather in Hebron, Illinois. Bigelow's friends growing up remembered him as a quiet, easygoing boy who liked to hunt and ride his motorcycle. After graduating from Hebron Community High School in 1938, he worked in nearby Woodstock, Illinois, at Alemite Die Casting and Manufacturing. Bigelow's younger brother joined the Navy during that time and survived the bombing of the USS West Virginia, BB-48, during the Pearl Harbor attacks. The incident likely led to Bigelow's choice to enlist in the Naval Reserve, which he did on September 21, 1942. After training, he reported to the destroyer USS Fletcher, DD-445, which set sail for the Pacific Theater in October 1943. Bigelow rose in the ranks from a firefighter to a water tender, which meant he was responsible for tending the fires and boilers in the steamship's engine room. At some point, Bigelow got to spend 2 hours with his similarly deployed brother as their ships met to refuel in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. According to an article in the Woodstock, Illinois Northwest Herald, that's the last time the siblings saw each other. On February 14, 1945, the Fletcher found itself in battle off Corregidor Island in the Philippines. Bigelow was standing on the top side of the ship when an onshore 6-inch Japanese gun fired, hitting the Fletcher and penetrating its lower decks. The shell exploded into fragments, which killed several men, hit a gun magazine, and set fire to several powder kegs in an ammunition room. Knowing that the next few minutes were crucial in keeping the ship from being destroyed, Bigelow jumped into action. He picked up a pair of fire extinguishers and rushed below decks to try to quell the growing flames. There was no time to spare, so Bigelow bypassed putting on a rescue breathing apparatus and dropped into the magazine hatch despite the flames and blinding smoke that billowed out. According to his Medal of Honor citation, the burning powder smoke seared his lungs with every breath, so he forced himself to quickly put out the fires and cool the cases and bulkheads. Bigelow made it back out of the compartment, but the damage to his lungs was done. The 24-year-old succumbed to his injuries the next day. According to the Northwest Herald newspaper, Lieutenant Arthur H. Murray, Jr. wrote to Bigelow's mother to inform her of the loss. Murray assured her that her son wasn't in pain and fell into a coma before he died. The young sailor disregarded his own safety for the greater good. His courage and actions kept the ship's damaged magazine from exploding, a disaster that would have left the Fletcher at the mercy of the pounding Japanese guns. Corregidor. It was your son's devotion to duty and his quick thinking that saved the ship and the lives of many of his shipmates, Murray wrote. For his sacrifice, Bigelow earned the Medal of Honor. The award was presented to his mother, stepfather, and brother on February 15, 1946, 1 year to the day after he died, during a ceremony at Great Lakes Naval Base. Bigelow was initially buried overseas, but his family had him repatriated to the U.S. after the war was over. The fallen hero was buried at Lynn Hebron Cemetery in his hometown on November 2, 1948. Bigelow's name has lived on. In 1957, the destroyer USS Bigelow, DD-942, was commissioned. A residence hall at Little Creek Naval Amphibious Base, now Joint Expeditionary Little Creek Fort story in Norfolk, Virginia, was named after him in 1974, and Bigelow Avenue runs through his hometown. So, Water Tender First Class, Elmer C. Bigelow, we thank you.
Thank you.
All right, take us out.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, pets, people everywhere, plant life, thank you so much for tuning in and hearing our voices. We're very happy to share the information we get to you. Hopefully you learned something. I know I did. And if you ever want to get a hold of us to say thank you, or hey, check this out, or oh, my grandfather was a machinist mate, or whatever the case may be, there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can email us. The email address is usnavyhistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on X Twitter with the handle @USNHistoryPod. Or you can join a Discord server, which we have linked in the show notes of the podcast application that you are using currently. I mean, I guess if you're using Alexa, that might be weird. I don't know how you'd get to that. But just look online, find this podcast, and then go to the show notes, and you can find the Discord server. And on there, you can interact with us. You can ask questions. You can just see what's going on. Join a community. And, of course, if you would, it would help us a lot if you rated and reviewed this podcast on your preferred podcast platform. Leave a comment. Help people to know what you got out of it. Tell a friend, family member, coworker, classmate, cellmate, whatever the case, just let them know. And thanks. It really means a lot to us when we see the number of listeners grow. I'm blown away. Thank you so much.
All right, everybody. With that, we're going to wish you guys fair winds and following seas. Bye, y'all.
Bye.